I've always been the type to believe in logic, in carefully laid plans, in predictable paths. Not because I liked it, but because it was safer than risking feeling too much. After he left, I stopped believing in coincidences. I started believing in walls, in boundaries, in silences. But that morning, a regular Tuesday that began with the muffled sound of the alarm and the lukewarm taste of my usual coffee, something in me faltered. Or maybe it was the universe that got it right, chose a different train, a different time, almost like someone running from themselves without admitting it. I took the line heading north to a place I hadn't been in years. The city was just a dot on the map, but to me, it was a buried portal, full of memories I swore I'd moved past. I had no plans to see him again. In fact, I didn't even imagine. He still existed outside my memories. But when I stepped into that train car, eyes still bleary from a restless night and thoughts in turmoil, I saw him. I saw the way his shoulders rested as if carrying the weight of the world. I saw the same haircut, now with gray streaks at the sides. I saw the profile I once kissed in haste, then with care. My chest froze, but my legs, traitorous or brave, kept moving forward. And then I did the unthinkable. With dozens of empty seats around, I chose the one right beside him. And as I settled in, so close yet so far, the world seemed to hold its breath. He hadn't noticed me yet, but I was already feeling it all again. The weight of absence, the taste of memory, and the bitter shock of realizing that despite the years, my heart still recognized him as home. He turned his face slowly, like someone catching a familiar scent in the air and needing to confirm if they're dreaming. When our eyes finally met, there was a second when everything seemed to stop. Not the train, not time, but me. Because in that moment, facing that gaze, I knew better than I wanted to. I realized how much I'd fooled myself trying to move on. His eyes weren't the same. There was a new shadow, a weariness that hadn't been there before, but still, it was him. The same man who once promised to stay and left as if nothing had hurt. He opened his mouth to say something but closed it again, and I was silently grateful, because I wouldn't have known where to begin either. We sat there, side by side, for minutes that felt like days. The train sped along tracks that no longer made sense, but we were bound to another kind of line. One, made of words we never said, kisses we didn't share, nights spent wondering, what if? Gradually, the silence became a wordless conversation. He shifted his body, uncrossed his arms, rested his elbows on his knees. I noticed the details. The old watch still on his left wrist, the ring that never existed, the faint scar on his chin he hated and I found beautiful. For some reason, everything felt the same, and at the same time, cruelly different. The distance between us was mere inches, but there was a chasm built of time, pain, and pride. And yet, something in that shared space was beginning to warm. Maybe it was the start of a bridge, or a final goodbye. But one thing I knew, I could no longer pretend this reunion wasn't cutting through me entirely. He was the first to break the silence, not with a question or an apology, but with a sentence. So simple it made my chest tighten. Do you still like black coffee, no sugar? It unraveled me more than any declaration could. Because only someone who truly loved you remembers details no one else notices. And there I was, once again, facing that version of him who saw through me, even when I pretended he didn't. I nodded, unable to hide the small, nostalgic smile that escaped. He gave a soft laugh, with his eyes as if we were picking up a chapter interrupted mid-sentence. And for a moment, there was no past or future. Just that suspended present, where what we were still made sense. We talked little. The words came, carefully like stepping on cracked ground, but each one carried more than it sounded. We spoke of the weather, of life, of trivial things, as if the subtext wasn't screaming. He said he was returning from a work trip. I said I was visiting an aunt, a half-truth, just to avoid admitting I didn't even know what I was searching for in that city. His hands brushed the seat between us, almost unintentionally, and I felt the urge to hold them like before, but I didn't, not yet. When the train announced the next station, the air shifted. The journey was nearing its end, and with it, the chance to keep pretending this was just a coincidence. I looked at him and he looked back, and without saying a word, I knew. If any step was to be taken from here, it would have to be with our whole hearts, because this wasn't about reliving what was. It was about deciding if it could still be. We got off together, but not side by side. He walked a little ahead, as if still processing what had just happened, and I followed with slow steps, trying to tame the whirlwind inside me. The city was the same, and at the same time, unrecognizable, maybe because the last time I was there, it was for him. And now, being there again, with him so close, hurt in a different way. When our eyes met again on the sidewalk, it was as if an invisible thread pulled our bodies in the same direction. He waited for me, and without needing to say anything, we walked together to the corner cafe, the same one we used to visit on Sunday afternoons. The owner was gone, the menu had changed, but the corner table was still there. We sat, in silence, until he took a deep breath and said my name, and it was as if the sound of it healed a part of me I didn't know was still wounded. Amélie. Just that. But laden with everything, with history, with weight, with longing, with love. And there, with the sun streaming through the window and reflecting on his scars and mine, we began to talk. Truly. No evasions. No lies. He told me why he left. Not as an excuse, but as a confession. He said he was afraid of not being enough, of trapping me in an unstable life. That he loved me so much he chose to let me go, thinking he was protecting me. And I cried. Not out of anger, but relief, because finally, after all these years, someone was telling the truth without fear of the damage. And even with the pain of his words, I felt lighter, because hearing the truth from someone's mistakes is sometimes more important than hearing an apology. His words lingered in me even after silence returned. It wasn't an empty silence. It was dense, full of everything left unsaid. I watched him as he looked at his own hands, as if they held the traces of what he couldn't hold on to. Time hadn't been kind to either of us, but it hadn't killed us entirely either. The truth is, absence only hardened the shell, never the core. And there, facing the man who once promised me the world and then vanished with the map, my heart was asking questions my mind wasn't ready to hear. Why now? Why this train? Why did he still move me so much? He spoke of the time he spent alone, of relationships that didn't work because no woman was me. And I listened with a mix of pain and tenderness, because knowing I was irreplaceable didn't give me back the lost years, but it warmed a part of me that had spent too long convincing itself it wasn't enough. I spoke too. I told him I hated him, that I learned to manage on my own, that I built a stable, comfortable life, but without the spark he ignited with just a look. I said I tried to love others, but none of them looked at me like he did. And in that moment, it was as if two souls, finally mature, stood stripped of all pride. We saw each other, truly saw each other, not as before, idealized, infatuated, dreamy, but as now, wounded, whole, real. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a wall. It was a bridge. He reached his hand across the table, and for the first time in years I held it. And the touch wasn't a shiver of novelty. It was a reunion, a recognition of all we were and what we might still be. But there was more to say, more to decide. The past had brought us here. But the future, that was still uncertain territory, and courage would be the next step. We stayed there for hours, but time seemed to bend to our presence. The words grew lighter, and the silences between them more comfortable. The pain, though still present, no longer screamed, it whispered. And yet, there was a point neither of us dared touch. The what now? It was as if speaking of the future might ruin the present, as if naming what was blooming between us again might scare it away. But life doesn't wait for us to be ready. And when he got a phone call, I knew the bubble had burst. I saw the change in his face. The light in his eyes dimmed by news I didn't hear but understood. He hung up and didn't need to explain. There was a commitment, a return, an obligation waiting for him, far from here. Whatever we were building in the warmth of reconnection was now facing a silent test. He looked at me as if apologizing for something he hadn't even done yet. I have to go, was all he said. And I nodded as if I understood, but didn't accept. The pain returned, but this time I didn't swallow it. I faced it. Are you leaving like before? Or are you going to stay and fight for this? My voice was steady, but my heart trembled. It was my turn to refuse half words. My turn to demand he choose, and not just disappear. He hesitated. I saw in his eyes the internal battle between what was right and what was true. And when he took a step back, my chest tightened. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just stood, left a folded bill on the table, and walked to the door. Behind me, the sound of his own steps, nothing more. He didn't follow, not in that moment. And that's when I understood. Sometimes love needs more than a chance. It needs action, presence, choice. And in that moment, more than loving him, I needed to love myself enough not to wait for someone who wasn't sure if he wanted to stay. Returning home was like stepping into an old space with rearranged furniture. Everything was where it should be, but nothing made sense anymore. The routine that once gave me security now felt like a narrow hallway where every wall whispered his name. I lay in the same bed where I'd so often promised myself to forget, and found myself reliving every moment of the train, the cafe, the subtle touch of his hand on mine. The difference was, this time, I didn't cry. There was a new firmness in me, born not of indifference, but of clarity. I was no longer the woman he left years ago. I was the woman who had the courage to sit beside him, even without knowing if I was still welcome. The woman who heard the truth and embraced it, who offered her heart with maturity and still knew to step back when the other wasn't ready to receive it fully. In the days that followed, I kept living, but every gesture carried a subtle weight. I didn't expect a message. I didn't check my phone with anxiety. But there was a small, quiet, stubborn part of me that still believed that if he understood, he'd come. Not like before, with easy promises or rehearsed gestures, but as someone who finally chose to stay, who realized that love isn't enough without presence, and yet day after day, his absence stretched like a shadow at dusk, until something changed. A letter arrived, handwritten, with my full name on the envelope and the handwriting I'd recognize even blindfolded. Inside, few words, but all of them precise. It wasn't an attempt to win me back. It was a request to start over, an invitation to meet him. No promises, no guarantees. Just the truth. I'm not the same man anymore, but everything in me still recognizes you. I took a deep breath. My heart pulsed between my fingers. And in that moment I knew. This time, the choice was mine, and I hesitated before responding. Not because I doubted what I felt, but because I'd learned the hard way that love without maturity is like a flower in a cracked vase, beautiful at first glance, but doomed to wither. I spent the night rereading that letter, each word taking on a different tone as the light shifted in my room. There were no promises, no grand declarations, and that's exactly what touched me. He didn't want to return to the past. He wanted to build something new from the shards that still shone. And me? I wanted to believe it was possible. We met in an old park, the same one where years before we watched a sunset in silence. He was already there when I arrived, hands in his pockets, eyes lowered, as if waiting not just for me, but for the chance to do everything differently. And I, as much as I wanted to seem composed, felt my heart fragile, trembling like a leaf in the wind. He walked toward me slowly. He didn't try to hug me. He just looked into my eyes with that same calm intensity that always had the power to disarm me. I'm not here to convince you of anything, Amélie. I'm here because I don't want to leave things half-finished anymore. That's when, for the first time since the reunion, I said everything I needed to, without haste, without fear. I told him how much it hurt to grow without him, about the relationships that didn't touch my soul, about how, even after years, he was still the only name my longing knew how to say. But I also spoke of my achievements, of the woman I'd become, of the strength I found when he left. If this is going to happen, it has to be with who I am now, not who I was. He smiled, eyes glistening as if hearing the most beautiful truth in the world and not running from it. It's exactly with you now that I want to be. He extended his hand, not as someone asking, but as someone offering, and in that simple gesture, I found more truth than in 1,000 past promises. I took it, without haste, without fear. For the first time in a long time, there was no urgency, just presence. We walked through the park like two strangers who recognized each other by touch, by breath, by the history they carried silently in their eyes. There was no need to revisit every pain, every absence, every empty night. We were there because, despite everything, we chose to be. And that choice, in itself, was already the start of a new chapter. We sat on the same wooden bench where, years before, he'd written my name on the back with a blue pen. Time had erased almost everything, except the stroke of the initial A, which still held firm, like a symbol of something that never died. We laughed about it. He ran his finger over the wood and said, "I think the universe was just waiting for us to stop running." And I believed him. Because sometimes love doesn't get lost. It just waits. Waits for people to grow, mature, fall, rise, and find themselves before finding each other again. There was no goodbye, because this time there was nothing to leave behind. There were no cinematic kisses or eternal vows under a pink sky. There was something better. The decision to walk side by side, one step at a time, without erasing what we were, but without repeating past mistakes. It was a quiet restart, but full of meaning. Because when two hearts reconnect after losing each other so much, love doesn't need to shout. It just stays, present, alive, real. And there on that old bench, among falling leaves and promises blooming in silence, I understood. Love won. Not because it was perfect, but because it returned, and this time it chose to stay. 2 years have passed since that improbable reunion on the train, and I still catch myself wondering how life can weave together loose threads when we least expect it. We're not a fairy tale couple. We remain human with our differences, quirks, good days, and days when we barely understand each other. But there's something between us that wasn't there before. The daily choice. The choice to stay, to talk, to not run when things get hard. We live in a simple house with wide windows and a coffee maker that brews black coffee, no sugar, every morning. He always wakes up first and calls me with that tone only he has, somewhere between care and longing. On Sundays, we walk through the same park, where it all began again. The bench is still there, and the A on the wood, now renewed with paint, has become our little altar of memory. Sometimes he holds my hand in the middle of a mundane conversation and looks at me as if time has stopped again, and I know he's remembering that day on the train. I remember too. I always will. Not out of nostalgia, but gratitude, because it was there, between the tracks and the silence, that I found myself again. That I rediscovered the man who left, yes, but returned, and returns different, returned ready. Today, when I look at him, I don't see what we lost, but everything we chose to build afterward. And that, to me, is what makes love win. Not the absence of pain, but the courage to love even after it.